For the first, I have to explain to people that I live in London, and I have lived in London for 48 years. I am originally born in Denmark with a Norwegian mother. So my childhood was both in Norway and in Denmark, and I came from a very spiritual family. The part was mostly in Norway with my mother, who had independent voice, but in the light, not in the dark. So all my sort of interests have started since a child. And I relocated over to England and was taken, as I will say, by spirit into England. That's how it all started. I came over and started to work and go to spiritualist churches, which we didn't have in Denmark at that time. I knew of, but of course we have hundreds, absolutely hundreds in Great Britain. And being able to sit in development in different circles, because I've tried all circles in England when I came over. I learned that way directly by spirit. Has also been, very much been involved with physical mediumship from when I got over here. Didn't really know a lot about it until I sat and knew Leslie Flint over many years when he was alive. And at the time was being taught by other mediums also, physical and mental mediumship. So I have really worked on the platform in Great Britain, as I said, for 47, 48 years, but have traveled considerably a lot in the Nordic countries, which is not just Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. It includes Greenland and Iceland and Finland in the same time, known as the Nordic countries. But everything I know and everything that I do, I have always been taught by spirit, or they have put me into situations where I have had to learn from a very beginning and a background of all the work. We did not have computers. No way could I go in and start finding results over computers. Because that I have a blindness with my word, I am dyslexic, very severe dyslexic. I couldn't go and get books out, neither. I couldn't read them because I don't understand it. So I misunderstand a lot if I was reading. So actually Spirit said to me, we like it that way, Marion, because it means we can teach you ourselves. And that has really been my background of having to learn by Spirit, by doing, I have to say. And I think that is where I come into, how do I know about hauntings, as we call it? And I would like to take everybody back, how I actually know about this and what I have been taught. I have to go back to roughly about 1970, thereabout, sort of 74, 75, when I was on the platform in a spiritualist church in London working. I didn't know the people who came into the church, but there was a woman in the church that came up and spoke to me afterwards. And she literally said to me that she would like to talk to me personally afterwards. There's something she wanted to ask about. And we ended up going home to me because I lived at that time quite close to the church. And the woman introduced herself, and she was medium and healer Rose Gladden. I think only people who has been in the movement as long as I will know who Rose Gladden was. She's now passed over many years. She was very much a trusted medium and healer in Great Britain, and was known for her outstanding work, where she also had a recognition from, we call it the psychic dinner and dance we had here, from Psychic News, Psychic World, 2 Worlds, where she became the best medium, the best healer, and she was fantastic. Leslie Flint and Gordon Higginson knew her and things like that. What was interesting about my conversation with Rose Gladden were that she actually said to me if I knew anything about hauntings. And I just sat looking at her and I went, pardon? And she just said again to me, do you know anything about hauntings, Marion? And I couldn't quite understand what she meant about a haunting. I had never heard about it before. I didn't know what she was talking about. And she smiled. And she just says, I want to put you through a test, she said, because I have a feeling that you will know more when you're finished with this, but I want to test you. So this is how I got tested by Rose Gladden in my work. And I have never forgot this. She asked me to come with her, but she said she will go to a place that was haunted, and I have to go to see her there on a Saturday. And the place in which I had to go to was in North London. And she said, this is the address you've got to go to, Station Road, number 11. I will be there waiting for you, and you will be there at 2 o'clock. So I said, fine. So I got on the underground, got out of this particularly underground station, and I found the road called Station Road. And as I was walking down Station Road, I was going house number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, all the way down the road. But I could not see number 11. It has vanished. And I thought, strange, looked at my piece of paper in which she has written, and it says Station Road, number 11. So I went forward and backwards in the street, trying to look for number 11. I just couldn't find it. So I saw the postman coming along the road. So I stopped the postman and said to him, excuse me, I said, you couldn't just tell me where this road, the number 11 in this road called Station Road. And he looked at me like if I was totally nuts and crazy. And he said, you're standing right outside it. There it is. And in the door stood Rose Gladden and waved. And she went like this. And she said, come, Marion. I went into her and she looked at me and she smiled and said, you have just passed your test. And I said, what test? And she said to me, if a house is haunted, Marion, and you can do this work, what spirit will do with you is blind you so you cannot find it. And that was exactly what you did. I could not find number 11 Station Road. So that was my first invitation into what I call hauntings. And I helped Rose Gladden, looked around, and it was actually Rose Gladden that took me under her wings to teach me various different phenomena, as she calls it, within this, but also was teaching me that everything is not of spirit, that there are things like energy-based, there are communication skills with spirit. And she said, you don't need to use anything, Marion, except for your hands. She kept on saying, your hands is your weapon in everything. That's how you can feel spirit around. You don't need instruments, you don't need anything. But I am going to tell you, you will always remember that if you go to a place and there is a haunting, then if you find a place, it's fine. It might be something else. But if you're going to a place and you can't find it, then there's trouble. Then you have actually entered the right place where you have to go and give help. So that was how I actually learned from Rose Gladden what hauntings were. This repeated itself to my next story I would like to talk about, because this was a learning curve for me, I have to say, and also an understanding how a medium often cannot work on their own. That's something else that Rose Gladden says, never do something that you don't feel you have to do, Marion. Ask for help by somebody else if you can. That was another thing she taught me. This particular place I'm talking about now, that was in a place in Kent, in England. It was in South England, in Kent. And a guy called Bob Course, that was a healer, asked me if I could go out to a farmhouse in which there has been a lot of trouble with over a long period of time. They have had various different mediums out there that has already identified various different things about a man that had fallen down during the Second World War in his plane, and he was haunted the place, and all sorts of things like that. And I said, all right, I will come out. I don't know what I can do at this time. What was I, about 26, 27, 25? I didn't know what I could do, but I said, I will try. Now, remembering Bob Course has been out to this place over a year and taken all these mediums out to this farm, we were then traveling together in his car, and suddenly he's just stopped his car and I said, I just don't believe this, Marion. I can't find the address. Can't find it. I had been out here so many times, and I just started to laugh. And I said, oh my God, not another one. And I remember having to sit on his car bonnet and actually tell him the way, where to go. And of course, we ended up at the farm. When I got into the farm, I wasn't uncomfortable as being uncomfortable with the spirit. I was curious what was happening here. And in the room we went into where most of the hauntings have happened, there was an open fireplace, there was only one window, there was a door you can go in at, and we just sat near a table, we sat there. And I was looking around and I thought, you know, what is it I can see? What is it that's happening here? I was a bit sort of confused until suddenly I just sat up like this and I looked around and I sort of looked at shapes, almost it looked like gargoyle, like things in some churches, running along the floorboard. And I was just looking at these things. And I just turned around and I just said, my God, I said, you know, what kind of spirit are this? What kind of things is it? And you actually heard, I got hit. They smacked me right in my face. And you saw there was like almost fingerprints or something like that, very small fingerprints. And the next things that happened were, I was taken out of my chair and just pushed over at the wall. And I sort of slid down the wall. And they were all standing up and looking. And of course, as a 25-year-old, I just stood up and said, if that's all you can do, be afraid, because I am not. I mean, I was shaking inside because I didn't know what was happening. When my own guide came through and said, Marion, this haunting is not what you think it is. And I thought, what do you mean? And then he turned around and said, you have to ask the man who owns this particular place, this farm, where has he been in the last 17 years? There lies the keys, Marion. And I thought, what do you mean? I said, don't question me, just ask him. So I stood there and I said to the other guy, he was also known as Bob. I said to Bob, excuse me, Bob. I said, what is it you're not telling us? I said, I need to know, where have you been in the last 17 years? And his face just went like that. And he sort of bent his head down and he looked at me again and he said, in prison. And I said, why have you been in prison? And he said, I murdered my mother. And he was in one of the toughest prisons we have in England called Broadmoor. And he sat there for 17 years. And Broadmoor houses nothing but traumas there. There's nothing but murders out there, child molesters, murders, all that kind of thing. It's a terrible prison. And as he got released, because of his mother's death 17 years ago, he was the only child. She owned a house. That was being sold, but the money that was held in trust for him was given to him as he came out of prison. And he bought this house with the money, the farm. And I just stood there and I just thought, I can't do this on my own. I don't understand this at all. And I said, because it's almost like if it is not spirit, yet again it's spirit, but I feel there's something else in the house. I can't quite understand what it is. And suddenly out of my mouth came, no, Marion, you have to find somebody, or somebody has to find somebody who's a magician. And we don't mean a magician with a top hat and a rabbit. We mean a magician, somebody who can do something very different. So I turned around and I told the people there that I couldn't do it, but they will have to go out and find something called a magician that has to help them. And that was that was the end of that one. I know that it took Rose Gladden, Winnie Kent, another medium, about 6 months before they found this man who was a magician, and then found out what a magician were. He was Jewish and he was roughly maybe about 50 years of age. But the part of him were not a magician, as I said, with a top hat, but he was a guy who was Jewish. He came and he opened up a huge big desk he took with him and put 3 books on the desk. And one with the Quran, one with the Bible, and one with something else. And he did actually do what is known as a pentagram on the floor. And in that pentagram, he put candles down. And there was Bob Course and a girl called Sue that was there. And he turned around and he said, right, Bob, you are the candle guide. And here is a long stick. You have to lit the candles in case they go out. And he went over and he said to Barbara, he said, Barbara, he said, you will now be, he said, the wind guide. If the wind starts, you will have to stop it immediately. And I will give you some word that you have to say. And he turned around and he said to Bob, and I will give you some words you have to say. Every time a candle go out, you must say these words. But he also turned around and said, none of you understands the words. It just has to be said. And they are not the same words that has to be said. It's only about 2 lines, but you have to continuously keep on saying these words. And then he stood and he started in Hebrew, I think it was. And suddenly it started. He said the whole room just started. There was a wind that came in around the room, and 2 or 3 of the candles literally blew out. So there was Bob Course with his lighter on the floor, saying these words, lighting all the candles. Barbara was standing there with her words for the wind, and apparently this went on for 3.5 hours. And in the end of it, it stopped totally. The light was back up, on again, and everything was absolutely back to normal again. What was interesting about this one were that they all saw it. They were all part of it. But the man who did it, the Jewish guy, turned around and he said, may I ask you, who on earth have asked me to come in here? Who knew about this? And he turned around and said, well, a young medium called Marion from Denmark. And he turned around and lifted his finger and said, he knew exactly what she was saying. She could never have done this on her own. So that is a story for me that was very interesting because it was a learning curve for me. Now, I gave you the last little part of the story. Let me just tell you, I didn't understand the last bit of the story because I didn't hear it for almost 15 years. It was only when Bob Course came to London, he's moved down to Wales, that he told me the story and was surprised that I didn't know what was happening. So what I'm trying to say, you don't always get the stories straight away. That can go years before you understand what really has happened. So that was a story in which I really started to have respect for, there was many, many different kind of hauntings, spirit, many different ways of doing it. It's not always you can do it on your own. Another thing that Rose Gladden always turned around and said, and maybe that's why she's a healer, she said, you also, Marion, has to heal the room or have to heal the place and never do this work on your own. Another story, again, that I was involved in was in Norway. Now, I don't know how many people who are really interested in going back in history when it comes to, let us say, 100, 200 years ago. I mean, in those days, there must have been hauntings and spirit or protection or whatever. Well, what I did do, I started to do a research. I wanted to know, really wanted to understand, what did they do in time gone by with all this? What did they use? What was their weapon, if you like? What was it that they could do the same as mediums does today, go around and sending people into the light or God knows what else? So I started to find out that in the old days, they used, believe it or not, iron. Iron was a weapon that they would have used to all evil spirits to get them away from the place they lived in. Another thing was copper. They used copper, and then they also used a lot of different kinds of herbs. And I thought, how very interesting. Now we have a farm in France that's from the 17th century. And when I went there, we started to restore the farm back to what it was. We found buried in the walls out there is about 1 meter thick. But what we found in there was hay and horseshoes of iron buried in the walls. And when I was into Sweden and I was doing a lecture in Sweden, in what we call a manor house in Sweden, the guy who owned it, he was from Lund University in Sweden. And he was listening to my conversation about iron and hauntings from the old days. When I was finished, he called me over and he said to me, I want to tell you something, Marion, something that's extraordinary, what you're just talking about. I said, I don't understand all this jargon about spirit or whatever. He said, I just don't understand it. But I am so taken by what you said. And I said, why, what do you mean? He said, when we bought this place, it was a 200 years old manor house in Sweden, he said, the entrance is a beautiful entrance, but the stone lying outside the front door had tipped sideways. So what they had to do, he said, was have to get somebody to lift it so they could put a balance into it and keep it. And when they actually looked into why it has gone sideways, when they looked down, they saw 3 horseshoe lying side by side. Again, he said, we didn't know why they were there, but we left them and put the stone back on again. So again, we had this here with that they have used in those days, 200 years ago, back in Sweden now, never mind about France, they have used iron. There's something about iron. We can't find iron in today because it doesn't exist, because everything today is stainless steel. They're not iron anymore. But they used to have nails that was also made of iron. They used to make those in and put them in corners of the rooms for protection. So I thought, how interesting all these things. And then I thought to myself, I wonder what I can do with the copper then. I mean, what is there in copper? What is this thing about copper? So I was asked to go up to Norway because they had also a lot of problems in Norway, in another place in Norway. And that specifically place in Norway was a new house that has been built, and it was absolutely fantastic, except that there was never no peace there. They had 2 cats there. It was 2 Norwegian wood cats, skovkatter, kallar de dem for. So they had these cats that wouldn't come into the house. They couldn't find peace, and specifically couldn't find the peace downstairs in one of the bedrooms. So I was asked if I would like to go and stay there. And I said yes, because I was going to do work in the town next to it. And where did he put me? In the bedroom downstairs. I think he was trying me out somehow, and I knew nothing about this. But when I went to sleep downstairs, my God, biggest problem ever, I have to say, I was awakened by almost bells that was ringing, but it was like wooden bells, pieces of wood that was banging together, bang, 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 bang. And I went, what on earth is this? I sat up in my bed, I opened the curtains and looked out, and I could see the shadow of what we call a shamanic shaman, Sami, we call them in Norway, man walking up and down with 2 pieces of wood, cling, 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 cling. And I thought, my God, what is he doing out there? And I was looking out the window. You could see him, then you couldn't see him. And I thought, this is nuts. I tried to go back to sleep again, and forget it. I just could not go to sleep. It didn't matter what I was trying. I couldn't go back to sleep for this banging and noises that was going outside. So I, of course, sat up in bed, and I said to myself, what is this all about? What is this all about? What happened there were, I was told directly that this house has been built on a very old burial ground of the Sami people. It wasn't actually just a burial ground, but it was a holy ground where they sat and had their meetings, and where they sat and they heard about their stories and things like this. So I got up in the morning, I went upstairs because that's where the living room were, and I was really angry, and I said, why did you test me? Why did you put me in this bloody room? I went, it's ridiculous. And I told them the story. And he was all like, didn't know what to say. So I said, well, I think that you should go down to the farmer who sold you the piece of land and find out what was here before. So they went down with me to find out what was going on. And it was true. It was a place that the Sami in Norway owned, but the government has taken over. He has got it from the government, and he has sold it on to this family who built the house. Luckily enough, I had copper with me. I had 4 pieces of copper with me. And I thought, I'm going to try what Rose Gladden have told me also about using nature. So I thought, I'm going to try this. So I took these pieces of copper and I put it down on every door there was 2 doors, and then side of it. So I really ringed the house in with these copper piping I had with me. And that was it. And I just stood like that. And the 2 cats immediately came into the house for the first time in 2 and 3 years, just came into the house. And the whole house has been completely peaceful ever since. So that was another story I have to learn about how they did things in the old days and how you can have the peace with that. Now, my last one was in Greenland. I've just come back from Greenland, where I was asked to do some work for a huge, big, brand new institution. And it is a scientific institution, but there is about 5 and 6 or maybe more scientists that work on why the snow is melting and about the animals and things like that. So it's like a test center, but it is the most extraordinary building. I mean, it's architectural. It's so beautiful. It's unbelievable how beautiful it is. And I went around there and I sort of started to look around, and I really couldn't feel a lot there until I went into a specific place and I thought, no, this is an echo. This is not a haunting as such as what it is, an echo. It is an imprint. And prior to I came to this place, I have already told my girlfriend at the time in Greenland, Tine, I said to her, you know, they have also built this place on some kind of ancient, I said, a grave or whatever, something they have not had permission to build on top of it, or the local authority just said, oh, just built, and couldn't care less about anything else. And I said to them, somebody here have seen what we are terming a spirit walking. But as you see the spirit, as it walks, it doesn't have the clothing on of today. It has just clothing you have maybe not seen before, but it's just walking, like just going past. There's no communication, there's no nothing, it's just there. And then they said, yes, there's about 3 or 4 people who have seen this. And it's always a woman that walks in her clothing forward and backwards, doesn't say anything, she doesn't smile. And I turned around, no, it is what we call an imprint. It is an echo of what was once upon a time. So I started to teach them how to find out what it is by using their hands. And I have a method where I'll just take the hands like this, and I literally take and I walk with my hands like this. And suddenly what you feel is, it's wind that comes into your hand, because we are so sensitive in this part of the hands here. And I just thought it's almost like a vortex there's here, because you can feel that wind going on. So I got all the people who was involved in it, there was 3 of them, to try this with the hand. But I let everybody go outside, let one come in to try and stood in the spot, and let the other one, and they all found the same spot just with the hand. And I said, you can often pick up things by touching the walls. Try the psychometry on the wall, find out what it really is. So what I did with them, I said, come on, let us try to calm this place down. And we can do that very simple, I said, just by saying a prayer. Now, Greenland is a very Christian place. So I just said the Lord's Prayer. I said a prayer about, you know, sorry that we have stood here. I'm sorry what has been done, and so forth. And believe me, there has been no problem there ever since, because I've just spoken to them yesterday. But on the same hand, in the same building, something else happened. This is where the different are now in hauntings, what people don't understand. I went then upstairs and sat in the lounge, as I can only describe it, where the scientists were sitting. And I just sat down on an ordinary chair, and on top of it was a glass roof, so you can see all the mountains and the ice and everything else like this. And I just sat back. And suddenly I jumped out of my chair and I went, what? I went like this and spoke Danish. And they all stood and looked at me and said, what on earth happened, Marion? And I said, it's not what happened. I said, but who fell down from the roof, I think? There was this gentleman who fell in top of me. And he turned around and said, hello, Marion, I'm Danish. And I died because I didn't have my harness on. I should have had the harness on. The wind was too strong. And he stood there looking at me and said, my God, he was a Danish man. He died in March of this year. He fell through the roof as it was being built because he did not take care of himself. That is what I call communication with the spirit. Not that he was going in the place and was haunting it, but he was there in the sense of it to teach the people what a spirit are. somebody you can talk to. Why are they here? What is he doing here? He was just sorry because he hadn't taken his harness on. And what he wanted me to do is to let his mum and dad know there was, and still are living in Denmark, that he was sorry that he didn't put his harness on. And believe me, they have got the message. They got the message, I think, a couple of days or a week ago, or something like that, about their son. So that is, if you can see, a haunting where you can talk with the spirit. Sometimes they won't go. Sometimes you have to help them over. Sometimes not just sending them to the light. I mean, I've never heard so much rubbish in my life. You don't send people just to the light. If you have a proper haunting, you talk to them. You must find out the reason for why they're here. You know, why are they still haunting the place? Are they attached to the place? What is happening? Has something happened to them? Is there something they want to say? So this is all what Rose Gladden had taught me. But she taught me one more thing that I think is extremely important, and I do not hear this from anybody neither. She always turned around and she said to me, you have to ask questions, Marion. When you go into a home that's haunted, will you please ask questions? And I said, what do you mean, Rose? She said, well, find out if there's anybody there who watches horror films all the time. Is there somebody there who's played with the Ouija board? Is there somebody there who's an alcoholic or drug addict? Is there somebody there who has got a mental illness? Is there somebody there who takes drugs, not drugs from the, from your doctor? These are all facts in this whole operation of being a haunting. Is it somebody's fantasy? Or what is it? You have to ask this question, however hard it is, you must ask it. And I did that when I was in Denmark, making a program upon spirits in Denmark and about hauntings. In one of the places I got into, there was a young girl there who saw all sorts of things, except I couldn't see it. And I sat down with her and I just started very clairvoyantly to start to have a communication. And I was actually told by spirit that this young girl has been a patient in a mental hospital in Denmark up until 4 months ago. When I start looking around the house or the flat he was living in, there was 410, I think, horror films that has been watched. When I sat with her, I not only said to her, you have been in a mental hospital. I mentioned the town in which it were and the place and the hospital's name. And she said, you're right there. I turned around and I said to the TV crew and to the producer, do you really want me to carry on with this? Going and pretend there is a haunting in this house, so the hospitals and the doctors will see what is happening, and knowing that what we're doing is totally wrong because we're putting him on the spot of being not only mentally ill, but thinks that he can see spirit. That program was never shown on Danish television or in any of the Scandinavian countries. So it is very important that we ask these questions before you go in and start to do a haunting, to make sure that it isn't the people that has got an illness or alcohol or drugs or the reading board or whatever. I don't know if this makes sense to anybody who are listening to this program about being careful what we do, because we are not going to be taken as completely lunatics, but we have to really understand that there are a lot of mentally ill people that already hear voices, that already think that they can see spirit, who either are still on drugs for the dogs and are still hallucinating. So these are the things that I've had to learn through a long period. And I will only go to places if I ask those questions and know the history of what is going on. And today I'm afraid that anybody can go and find the history of the house in which they live in. When was it built? Who lived there? Has there been hauntings before? Ask the questions. Don't just go there. Ask the questions, because that's part of the work we have to do. Like Rose Gladden says, do you find the house easily, Marion? Find out if there's something else. If you don't find the house or find the place, there's trouble. So that is what I have learned for all my years. And maybe also in my mediumship, I always ask questions. I think that we as mediums should take that responsibility and ask questions. There you go.
Marion, that was absolutely fascinating. Now, I'm sure lots of people do have questions. So just put your hand up like that if you've got something that you'd like to ask Marion.
Come on, don't be shy.
Philip Wyatt.
Hi, Philip.
Necessarily a question, but when a person contacts my team to do an investigation, we have a very extensive, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. A very extensive questionnaire that we email them where we ask all those questions. Is anyone on medication, recreational or prescribed? Any marital discord in the house? You know, all those questions. And, you know, we tell them we're not being nosy, but we need to rule out other possibilities. And once that they do that, and we go into the home, our first objective is to debunk any claims of activity. We take EMF readings of the house to make sure that the electromagnetic fields aren't causing hallucinations or nausea or dizziness, because that can also do it. But with me being developing mediumship, you know, I kind of already know when I go in that there's already someone there, which, but I still have to carry out the scientific parts of the investigation. But I'm already usually either communicating with the spirit that's there, but I don't say anything to the team until after we've done all of our scientific data collecting first. But yeah, those questions are very important. I mean, especially the Ouija boards. Oh, people will lie about using Ouija boards, and they can cause some serious issues. We had 3 homes this year where they had used Ouija boards in the house and had brought in some really negative things. But yeah, questions are very, very important.
So have you ever, Philip, come across where you can just use your hand and not use the instruments, trying to use you as what I call the weapon of everything that happens? Have you ever tried that?
It's not my hands, but my whole body. I can feel the energy. And my team will use me to go through the house to do a sensitive walkthrough where I will find the spots for us to place our cameras, because I can feel where the activity probably happens. So it's not just my hands. I'll be covered in either cold chills or I get extremely hot, like just on fire hot. So I do use my body, but not just my hands. It's like I can feel it with everything, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do that too, but mostly my hands, because I can touch things. I often touch things like tables and chairs in the same time. And when you touch it, you have this kind of psychometry on it. And I can turn around and I can say, where did you get this table from? Have you got it from a second-hand shop and things like that? That's quite fascinating to actually use the bare hand all the time. It really is fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of
On the
those.
psychometry part of it, I'm not there yet to where I can touch the objects. I can often look at an object and feel an energy from it, but not great at that yet.
So have you ever noticed that some of the places you go to, you can't find it? You go around in circles and can't
Well, I
actually
use my GPS and it will take me in the opposite direction.
Yeah.
One house, I put the address in, I knew the area, and I ended up in a completely different area. And I was like, why is, I couldn't figure it out. It's like, why am I? Then I would put the address in again and head that way, and it would change the directions. So, yeah. And that was a very, very haunted house. But it took me, I was about 45 minutes late getting there because my GPS would take me to a different location with that exact address. So, yes.
That's very interesting. Again, you had those things too, which is just very interesting.
And that house did not want us in there once we were there. It was pretty rough.
Yeah. There's a lot of things like this happen. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Could I ask Marion a question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been to a couple of hauntings with the Ghost Club. Do you know the Ghost Club in London?
No.
Anyway, I've been to a couple of them. And I've previously been able to help spirits pass over who've been caught here, but they've been caught and they've wanted help. And I've been able to get my deceased brother to come along, and he takes them by the hand and he takes them across, and that's fine. But one of the hauntings I went to with the Ghost Club, there was a spirit there who has been there a long time. He enjoys being there. He was a paedophile, and he's very proud of the fact, very, very proud of the fact. And he is still there, and he watches people, particularly in the toilet. And he used to abuse young girls, particularly he used to take them into this cupboard. I would like to go back there, and I would like to get him to pass over, but I know that he wouldn't want to pass over. He enjoys being there, and he enjoys being able to watch people on the toilet, and more than that, to sort of be a part of them as well, the way that he sort of completely came into me. I'm sure he does that with other people. So how do you get somebody to pass over? I know that if you want somebody to pass over and they're sort of frightened of passing, you can find out more about them and what it is they're frightened of, and you can help them allay those fears to help them cross over. But if somebody doesn't want to, and is just quite nasty like this, you can't force them, can you?
There's not such a thing called want. What I often do when I have been out on various different hauntings in London, when I find a person I've got problem with spirit because you don't want to go over, the first thing to do is stay back and find out who does that spirit know on the other side of life. Who is or the father? Who have they had a relationship with that was very good when you were on earth? And then I ask for my helper to go and get that person that they know and bring them into it. And as they're brought into it, suddenly the man you're talking about will recognize that person and will also stand there and go, oh my God. And they will actually be brought over. He will be brought over, literally, either a family member or somebody that he has admired. And then he will be taken over. It has happened so many times that you ask spirit to help. You don't send them into the light. You can't do that. Find out who, within your ability of who on the other side is related to him and who did he have a good relationship with. When you find that person and you know he exists, ask your own helper or your guide to go and find him. And it was also something that Leslie Flint, the independent voice medium, in which he did, often when he sat, he was trying to contact somebody he knew. He said, oh, there is somebody here that's dying to hear from their wife, Sue. And he turned around and he said to Mickey, his guy, Mick, go on the other side and find them for me. I want to know who they are. Right. Bring them in here. Yeah. He said, Mickey ought to do it. Kind of situation. So in a sense of it, I'm doing what he has done, just sending somebody over, finding somebody that you were close to. So there is this kind of wanted suddenly to go over to the other side and being taken over by them. That is also a key. I don't know, Philip, if you do something like that too. I don't know.
I've never, I get asked for help a lot, and I will ask for my technician or angel to come in and to take them across, but I've never tried to cross anyone that did not want to go. But that's a great technique. But how do you get them to tell you who that person is on the other side?
Your helper, your own guide that you have got are the one that you will ask them to go and find out. Because remember that spirit does know. There's things about you far more clever than what we give them. We don't need to help spirit all the time. This is why I don't understand. We don't need them all the time we have to help them. No, ask for your spirit friends. Those you work together with, if they can give you help by going to find the situation, the person, and he will gladly do that. It's called cooperation with your own guide and yourself, and you will find that the result is there. You will really find it's there.
Thank you. That's fabulous. That's such great information. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? If we have another question.
God, what a silent.
Oh, so, Marion, what about the fairly normal sort of haunting is where you have somebody who used to live in a house, fairly harmless, somebody who perhaps was reluctant to leave the house. Is that something that you come across frequently?
Yeah, quite frequently. And I would just go and have a conversation with them and saying, look, come on. I said, you don't live here anymore. Let the people who's here live here. And I said, they have done the most greatest things to your place. Just look at it. It's beautiful what they have done. You have to go over on the other side of life. You know that you are dead. You might not want to, that you put the door over there and the door's over there, but it suits the building. You just have a conversation with them. And I can tell you this happened also in London. When I went to a castle in London owned by the Queen of England, I was asked to go there late one night. And in that specific place, which is very interesting, they again have had loads of mediums out there. They all could see people from King Henry VIII's time. They could all see all this kind, because what mediums attempt to do, and clap over the fingers to all the medium, they attempt to look at the building and thinking, oh, it's 800 years old, this castle, so there must be people from the 800 years as haunting it. Well, it wasn't, not when I went there. You have to go into these places at 12 o'clock at night because nobody is allowed to see you. I went to this particular place and I had literally with me the architect, the police, the security, myself, and a guy called Carl. I went in and it was a kitchen. They had to renovate the kitchen and a big hallway, but nothing stood still there. Every time the workman came in there, the hammer went that way, the nails went that way, the door opened up that way, another door shut down, and he got scared and he just couldn't finish the work. So I got into the building at 12 o'clock at night, stood there, and I was looking around. Now, I didn't see anybody from 800 years ago, none at all. What I did see down the other end was a little old man just leaning against the wall like that. And I went, well, who's he then? He doesn't look like 800 years old man. So I walked down there, walked up to him and then saying, excuse me, are you the ghost? And he laughed. And he said, and you can see me? I said, yeah, why shouldn't I see you? And he said, not like the other twits who's been here. And I started to burst out laughing and saying, why are you doing this? And he said, come on, he said, look at the skirtings, it's turned upside down. Look at the doors, they're hanging wrongly. Look in the toilet, the sink is half a centimeter, it's coming down. It shouldn't be that low. So there's great mistakes. I don't want that. I am the caretaker. I was a caretaker here for years. I only died 6 months ago, but I'm not going to go over until they've done the job properly. And I just laughed. And I went straight back again to the architect and says, do me a favor, open up all your papers. Let's have a look. And then I said, look at the skirting board. And he went over and looked at it and went back to he said, it's turned upside down. I said, yes. So I said, what about the doors? He said, God, you're opening up the wrong way. And I said, what about in the toilet kitchen part? The sinks. He said, oh my God, you put them too low. And I said, you correct all these things. And I'm telling you, the man down there, his name is Bob, and he will go. I went like this. He just wants to make sure that everything is perfectly okay. And they did it. And it opened up. It was this part for the public that was allowed to go in to see this part of the palace. It opened up at the time. And there has never been any trouble. 12 years later, I had a guy who came to see me. And he sat down and he said, I was really looking for, he said, for a Scandinavian blonde. He went like this and I sort of looked at him and said, why? And he said, well, I'm a hussar, somebody who rides on horses for the Queen. And he said that she came out to our place over 10 years ago and she talked to Bob. He was our caretaker and everything is all right. And I looked at him and says, you found her. So that was 12 years later. So sometimes you don't hear about these stories till years later. So what I'm trying to say here, you have also got things where a lot of imagination goes in with the medium themselves. It's the old house, it needs to be old. It needs to be spirit from that time. You go into a warehouse, it needs to be somebody from the warehouse. No, it doesn't. It can be anybody, including in people's houses. It can be anybody who comes by.
Okay, Marion, so what about poltergeist, classic poltergeist? You know that there are various theories about poltergeist, and the materialists say there's no spirit involvement at all. I'm just thinking about, they say it's the energy of a disturbed adolescent, or particularly the focus of the poltergeist. My theory is that there is spirit involvement, that there is that, but there is also spirit involvement. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, some of the incidences with poltergeist activities I have seen can be totally out of control. And I think that this thing that's very out of control, when lights goes on, light shots or whatever, is and has to do with the energy-based energy that is and can be built up around. But you have also got the intelligent, I have to say, poltergeist activities in which I have seen myself. And they have a habit. I don't know if anybody have ever seen the habit they have got. They will literally take knife and forks and place them in a long row, or they will put cups and pans on the floor in the long row. They will actually do patterns, which for me actually is not a game, but it is a way where a lot of activities are going on. But it isn't just that it is energy-based, it is actually partly spirit-based too, by doing all these kind of various different patterns and things like that. But I actually believe it is if you like, a combination of them both of where we have all the energy that comes, plus we also have spirit intervenience. And I think that when I say spirit intervenience, that is where they're trying to make patterns out of things, letting know there is also an intelligence behind some of the things that poltergeist activity does. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody.
So what advice would you give to somebody who is called into a poltergeist situation? How would they handle it?
I think that you first of all have to find about the house. You have to find out again. It's like we have just talked about what do they play with? Is anybody mentally ill? What is it there? You know, what is disturbing all these energies? I think we still have to do the research all the time to find out about the place, about the ground, or whatever it is. It's always to do with research to find out. So I always says, it doesn't matter where you're going, if it is an ordinary haunted, energy haunting, poltergeist, to do a bit of research, because there is a lot of, there isn't spirit there. It's other things, telekinesis. You can have all sorts of things active in houses. And I think what it is to find out the background, why this has happened and how it's happened. Is it because of one person is there? Does it happen more there? Or is it when a child is there, an adult is there? Or what is it? There is many ways that you have to find out and do research about poltergeist activity. And there's obviously, I don't know of two cases that are ever the same in poltergeist activities. They are so different. There has been cases in which I have not been involved in, but I have heard on, where they actually has set fire to the place. Very angry, very disturbed spirit, very disturbed energies, and very disturbed, trying to actually destroy. And that has really disturbed me quite a lot when I see things like that. That's happening. But there was always two children present when this happened. And first of all, I know that the family thought that the children might have set the house on fire, but they had cameras up and it wasn't them. So
fascinating. Anybody got a question? So tell me about the copper again, Marion. What is this something that a medium could do themselves if they've? And what sort of copper would they use?
For me, it is copper. You have got copper wiring. You have got copper things that you have, copper rods. Yeah. When I started to do the research about the copper, I actually found out that it has a lot to do with ley lines. It has a lot to do with energy lines. It's dispersed energy lines. And copper can do that. It can literally disturb. And I remember that Rose Gladden showed me this, and this is where the copper came in. We went in a place called Milton Keynes. It was a new town being built called Milton Keynes. And there was a family who lived in a house near the river. And they had a lot of activities in the house, but the thing was about the activities within the house, it wasn't quite normal, because that the typewriter would suddenly go ding, 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 and then the clock itself would go the opposite way around, and then the radio would turn on, and there was all sort of activities there. And Rose Gladden went, like this, and she walked around the house. Funny enough, you know the bag in the film The Exorcist had, like a doctor's bag. She had one of those too. And she took her bag out of the car, walked down, looked at the house, looked at where the river was, looked at the house, and she took a copper rod on the front door and just hammered it in. Then she went behind the house, she saw another rod, and boom, she put it in there. And she put, I think, about 4 different rods in when I was there. With this hammer, she put them into the ground, and suddenly the clock went the right way. Everything went the right way. Everything was back to normal again. And she just turned around and she drew on a map, and she says, you were in the middle of a cross ley line like this. That's why all hell broke loose in the house. Nothing to do with spirit.
Absolutely fascinating, Marion.
So I took that one with me. So now I'm going around looking at churches. I'm looking at where's the river, where's the church, where's things, because that's what she said to me, that ley lines often runs along rivers or churches and things like this. And if you can find the right point, you can stop it with copper rods.
Fascinating. What about exorcisms, Marion, and exorcists? Do you believe that, have you ever had any contact with a Catholic or a Christian exorcist? Do they have any abilities at all?
I think there's both yes and no in this whole question. I don't think this is just, is there, do they exist or whatever. I do remember, I mean, there's 2 small stories here. I was asked to go to a house, for instance, and it's again just talking about the religious side of it. It was a Muslim family that has moved in, so they had effigies of Muslim things. And there was just a spirit there who was angry about all these effigies that was on being Muslim. So we had a priest with us in that did a prayer, and everything stopped because it was a Christian prayer. And then he was being told, or whoever the spirit were, that they are now a Christian family who lives here. Yes, I have recently worked with a Danish exorcist. We had to do some work together because that a young man that came to one of my summer schools, and he was so overshadowed by spirit. It was unbelievable. Let me tell you, he was married to a priest himself. And I have just never known anybody who was so dangerous to himself. He would go down the motorway in his car, and he would go in trance and start driving. And this is just something you don't do. You don't touch anything with spirit when you're in public, out driving or whatever you are. But he became a danger not only to himself, but to everybody else. And I knew that I couldn't control him on his own. So I phoned up Tom, which is a Danish priest. And I asked Tom to help. And he said, I can only do what you have taught me, Marion, but certainly I will come with and I will help. And Tom went into the place where this guy was living with his husband, who was also a priest. And together they went around. And as an exorcist, which Tom is, he went around, blessed the whole house, put holy water down, went around and did. And also the young boy in which I'm talking about here did not end up in a mental hospital, but he actually got healed because also Tom did a lot of healing over a whole year period. So yes.
Well, that's a fascination of mine, Marion. To what extent is it possible for spirit to overshadow someone to the extent of causing mental illness? Do you ever have, I know that the Brazilians do a lot of work with spirit possession or obsession, which in some cases presents as mental illness.
Yeah.
Have you had occasions like that?
I only had it, I had it with this guy specific because that not knowing a lot about him and wondering why he came to be taught over a week's period. And the more I was looking at him, the more you could see that there was something totally wrong with him. You could see that he was not aware what was happening. You could see there was a danger point within him. So I have seen it within him. then trying to ask my own guides from the other side of when did all this start. And it started whether he was in a Catholic school when he was young. And it started really from there. And he had a mental illness. So he has had a mental illness since he was about 5, and has been in and out mental institution. And as he grew older and he was a gay guy, married a guy who still is a Danish priest. He got fascinated by the church again, and he got fascinating about the graves and gravestones or whatever. And he got this overshadow, which were overshadowing him really, because he was 2 different characters, but you could tell when it was mentally ill with him, but you can tell when there was a rational background behind it too. Some of the questions that I was asking and things that I was doing. I have only come across this a couple of times, but each one of them has been very, very different. There was one in specific that, if anybody can understand that one, I had a phone call from the Japanese bank in London with one of their chiefs there that has been in China. And people who knows a little bit about Japan culture, you do not touch any women at all. You are very polite over women. You are polite in all different manners. But he have had to go to Shanghai in China. And he got stopped on his way out to the airport because there was a shooting at the airport. On the way out to the airport, where a gangster got killed. And he was sitting in the back of this cab, and he was just sitting and meditating. And he suddenly felt something that shot him backwards in the chair. And he got on the plane and he got back home again. But when he went back to his work at the Japanese bank a couple of days later, he started to go up to the women and go, "Oh, I like you," and start to touch them, which you do not do anywhere in a Japanese bank. So they phoned me up and asked me if I could actually look and see what has happened. Was he ill? What was it? What was this all about? And he came down to see me in London together with his wife and somebody else from the bank. And when I sat talking to him, you could see a very strange shadow over his head, almost like a transfiguration. And a different voice will come out of him. And one of the voices I remember was a very nasty, could hardly speak English, something about "you never get me." There was, or something like that. And again, I have learned, don't be afraid, Marion. Of course, that can't happen. I just went over and put my hands on his neck and his lower back, and somehow managed to get whatever was in him out of him. And he was all right in the end of it. But who he's actually picked up, we found out later, was the guy who got shot in China. He was totally a maniac for women and drugs and everything else like this. And this was exactly the character in which he had in the bank.
Marion, I'm particularly interested when we're encouraging people to make spirit contact, whether or not we need to teach people protection techniques, because I'm always concerned about people perhaps opening up and picking up something that is not appropriate. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, it is again something I learned from the very beginning, that, I know how many methods there is today, and I think that that's what makes people crazy. Open up like a flower, close down like a flower, open up with a light, close down with a light, open up the doors, close down the doors. I think that it has become very controlling how to open up. I mean, I have always said, and will still maintain it, sit back and just say a prayer. Just a prayer, and ask your guides, your helpers to stay with you, to be with you in everything you do, and only see the goodness in things and whatever. So my prayer has always been a prayer of protection. I don't sit back and open myself up with all different kind of, I don't know what it is, all the chakras. And I mean, I can't remember if it was the blue chakras or green chakras or what is that? What chakras was it now? I mean, it drives me nuts. Why can't it just be simple? We're simple people. This is what Spirit says. You are simple, darling. Use simple technology. Don't use all those big words, Marion. You don't understand them. We don't understand them. So a prayer is enough.
Marion, thank you so much. It's been absolutely delightful hearing your stories. You are absolutely amazing, and I really do appreciate the mentorship that you have given to all of our people here today and on an ongoing basis. Marion has been so available to us and to all of our members. It's been absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Craig, would you like to say something to Marion? You just come in.
Yeah, I'd like to apologize for getting here late. I didn't look at the schedule.
That's
So
okay.
I thought it was going to be at 3 o'clock New York time. Marion, I have great admiration for you. Just what I heard at the end of it is just marvelous, but I would expect that. And so all of us who are out there who know you from just listening to you, in any opportunity that we get, we're so grateful. Thank you for everything you're giving to us and to the world.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you.